Welcome back to another episode of the Beyond Jaws podcast. On today's episode, we have Chantel Elston. She is a postdoc student at SciAb. I'll worry about saying what SciAb means during the actual episode, so stay tuned. But we're talking all about stingrays, a lot of research in South Africa. It's a great episode. We also talk about her science communication activity on YouTube. She has 25,000 subscribers. We have 462 at the time of recording this. She is amazing. We talk about her success on there and what she likes to talk about, all things marine science and marine fun and marine careers. And we're going to talk about her career on today's episode of the Beyond Jaws podcast. Let's start the show. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another exciting episode of the Beyond Jaws podcast. I am your co-host, Andrew Lewin, with my co-host, Dr. David Ebert. Dave, are you ready to talk about some stingrays?
Oh, heck yeah. I love talking about flat sharks. And I love when we get people on like Chantel, who focuses mostly on the flat sharks. We had, as many of you know, we had 6 months or so ago, we had Jalen Myers on there from Australia, who just is a flat shark fanatic. And we have another one here with Chantel. And of course, she's also from South Africa, which you know how I am when we get South African people on there. And she did her PhD. She worked with my good friend Paul Cowley there in South Africa, and she also went to my alma mater, Rhodes University, and she's affiliated with the with SciAb, which stands for the South African Institute for Aquatic Biodiversity, which I should know because I'm also a research associate there as well. But no, I'm really excited. She's her science. She really does. Does good science, and she's married that with the science communication. As Andrew, you just said, she's got like over 25,000 followers on her YouTube channel. And it's awesome. It's really great seeing somebody be able to kind of compete those two areas and be very successful at it. So definitely excited for today's episode.
100%. I'm looking forward to it as well. So let's get into the interview with Chantel Elston. Enjoy the interview, and we'll talk to you after. Hey, Chantel, welcome to the Beyond Jaws podcast. Are you ready to talk about rays and elasmobranchs?
I'm always ready. Let's go.
Wonderful.
That's great attitude. Well, welcome to another episode of the Beyond Jaws podcast, where today we have Dr. Chantel Elston, another terrific guest from South Africa. And you know me, if anybody's from South Africa, it's going to be a terrific show today. So Chantel is a marine scientist and conservationist who focuses her research on threatened sharks and rays, and especially on those lovable rays, which we often refer to as flat sharks. Chantel currently is a consultant for a couple of NGOs, the Wildlife Conservation Society and the Oceans Research Conservation Africa Foundation. And she's also a research associate at Rhodes University in Grahamstown and also at the South African Institute for Aquatic Biodiversity. Chantel is fiercely dedicated to understanding and safeguarding our oceans ecosystems, and she's also very passionate about science engagement and communication. And she believes by connecting everybody with the ocean, it's the only way to really save it. She manages and engages the public through a local shark and ray citizen science project called Elmo Africa, and she also shares her marine science stories on her YouTube channel, Telly's Marine Tales, which you have to check out, and we'll definitely post that after the show to check out. But so anyway, we're really happy to have her on the show today. Her education background: she went to University of Cape Town, where she obtained her Bachelor's of Science degree. She also did an honors there, and then she went over to Rhodes University in Grahamstown to complete an MSc and her PhD. And with that, Chantel, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me. I'm really excited to be here today.
Great. So we always like to start off with, like, how did you get interested in marine science, sharks, rays? How did you get interested in that?
Well, I feel like with most of our stories, it was something I wanted to pursue ever since I was a child. I don't really know who introduced me to even the term marine biologist. I don't know where that passion started from, but I just remember as a kid, my best friend and I, we had a journal. And at the age of 7, I was writing in this journal that I wanted to be a marine biologist when I grew up. As I said, I don't even know where I learned that term from. At the time, my dad was pretty passionate about the ocean. You know, he was part of our coastal sort of sea rescue institute. And so I would spend my summers on the beach playing around in rock pools and that sort of thing. But that always just fueled that initial interest that I had wherever it came from. And then, I was lucky enough to grow up on the coast, and then for university days, I ended up at the University of Cape Town, where at the time I didn't really have much knowledge on sharks or rays or elasmobranchs or anything like that. But in my second year, one of my lecturers, we were having an ichthyology class, and he just mentioned in passing that rays were one of the least studied groups of vertebrates on the planet. And I was like, right, I'm there. My ears were pricked up immediately, and it kind of started a love relationship from then onwards. And then I was very lucky to be able to pursue my master's in stingrays, in a stingray ecology project. It was one of those weirdly serendipitous moments in life where at the time, nobody was really actively pursuing research on rays in South Africa. I knew in my honors year that this was something I wanted to do for my postgrad. And so I had approached some of my lecturers at UCT. Oh, I really want to do a project on rays. Will you take me on as a student? I have some ideas, but nobody was really willing to go forward with that. So I had actually signed up for a master's on turtle genetics. And I think my life would have been so different if it ended up that way. But luckily at the time, Dr. Paul Cowley, who you know very well, Dave, he had this amazing project in the Seychelles that was investigating a population of stingrays there. And he was just looking for a student who was interested in rays. And we managed to get in touch through one of my UCT lecturers. And yeah, that was that was the start of the now 10-year journey into researching rays. So I'm very grateful that all just seemed to kind of like align and come together at the right time for me.
What can I ask you back up a little bit? What part of the coast area of South Africa did you grow up on?
At Cape Town. So I'm originally from Cape
Town.
Oh,
okay. Love people listen to the show, and I love Cape Town. That's one of my like favorite places in the world, I have to say. Anyway, I love there. So nice. You grew up there along the coastal area in South Africa, and then you found Paul Cowley, who, as you probably know, worked on blue stingrays for his MSc thesis, and that's back when him and I were both graduate students at the time. And South Africa, for those that don't know, there's a lot you can do in terms of ray research, and Chantel can, I'm sure, expand even more today on it. But you managed to get this job, this position working on your MSc in the Seychelles, which is a beautiful place. Can you tell us about how it was working in the Seychelles?
Incredible. At the time I had only experienced Cape Town oceans, which for those who don't know are sort of cold water ecosystems, kelp forest dominated. And so traveling to the Seychelles was, for me, the first time I had traveled internationally, and also the first time I had traveled to tropical waters, and I could swim in the water without freezing to death and without having to wear a super thick wetsuit, and just experiencing the amazing biodiversity and the typical marine megafauna that you associate with warm water tropical reef ecosystems, for the first time seeing sharks and rays and turtles and manta rays and coral reefs and diversity of fish. And my mind was just completely and utterly blown. And I still have this vivid memory of going out on the boat the one day, and it was my first time in the boat. And I'm just this naive student, and there's sort of a turtle that pops its head out in the water next to the boat. And I'm like, wow, there's a turtle. And everybody's like, yeah, so what? We can see hundreds of them. So it was just one of those really eye-opening experiences. And yeah, it was fantastic.
Yeah. So you went there. You worked on the porcupine rays, which, as the name implies, have a porcupine type of skin texture. And I presume you'd never heard of those before you started your thesis project, correct?
No, none of the species that I worked on, I had never heard of before. So I worked on 3 species in the Seychelles, in this really beautiful shallow water ecosystem known as the St. Joseph Atoll. And what was very special about this place is that it's kind of a remote island that is privately owned. And so you can only access it as a researcher or as somebody working there. And so it's this pristine, beautiful ecosystem with just an abundance of stingrays. You sort of walk along the sand flats and you can't help but almost step on them. There are so many of them there. And so then it was just trying to understand, my study was trying to understand this population, a little bit about how many individuals there were, but mostly trying to figure out how they all lived together in the space. their movements and their feeding ecology, and that sort of thing. So it was these three species, but the porcupine ray will always hold a special place in my heart because it's kind of the only species of stingray that doesn't have the stinger or barb on its tail. And so, as you said, Dave, it has this sort of porcupine texture skin where its back is covered in these very sharp, almost like rose bush thorn type projections. And so it's very painful if you stand on them or if you put your hand on them. But the fact that they don't have a stinger or a barb makes them a bit easier to catch. And so what we ended up doing in trying to catch these individuals was essentially kind of creeping up on them as they were hiding out in the sand, buried in the sand, and pouncing and grabbing their tails. So it was kind of like a porcupine ray rodeo.
Yeah,
That's hilarious.
I heard you came up with quite a novel way to catch those things, and that was basically sneaking up on them and pouncing on them.
Yeah, we were just in
Nice.
the field, and initially we were using this rod and reel and just sighting for individuals and catching them with a normal hook and line. And then Paul, one day was just like, you know what, we can get so close to these guys. Why don't we just jump them and try and catch them? So that's what we ended up doing, and that was the method going forward.
So this is really interesting. Sneaking up on a stingray. So were they like obviously they weren't timid around you, even though they're live in a fairly secluded area. How did you you must have been you were scuba diving at the time, I assume, right?
No, so we're walking on these sort of knee-deep sand flat areas, essentially. So it's on these almost intertidal flat type things. And so these rays, they're sort of buried in the sand and they rely on camouflage a lot. So they feel like once they're, hunkered down in the sand that they're safe. And so we
Okay.
could, walk quite close up to them and then from there jump and pounce.
Gotcha. So they're just staying hidden while you're walking close, hopefully that
Yes.
you don't see them and then you get them. Okay, I got you. Because I was like, it must be even if you're whether you're scuba diving or whether you're trying to get after them, they must hear you or they must feel you coming, just from the water being displaced and the waves and stuff like that. I was like, how do you do that? That's like ninja-like.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
It usually took a couple of tries, but eventually we would get there.
Yeah. I can imagine.
What
And then
exactly?
they had this really fun.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Dave. They had this really fun technique where if you would pounce and you didn't catch them the first time, they would sort of swim around in a circle and dig up the sand a lot and create almost like the sand plume. So they were trying to re-hide themselves in the sand plume. So all you had to do was kind of like look around you and wait for it to dart out, and then you could try again.
Yeah, that'd be. It's almost like they're trying to test you again. It's like, see if you can catch me again. I'm going to really hide from you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How intimidating is it when you start a project like that to study three new species that you don't really know much about? I think a lot of times when we hear about students and people studying new species, Dave, you go through this all the time. You've discovered so many species. How intimidating is it when you start from scratch and you're like, I know nothing about these species. Here I am having to learn about three that I've never seen before, never even heard of before. What's that like, when you first start that project?
I mean, yeah, it is very intimidating. And especially as a young master student who is experiencing, as I said, all of these new things for the first time, not even to mention just trying to understand what these three new species are. But I feel like as a ray researcher, that's just the way it goes. Most of this, actually, all of the species, I think all of the species that I've worked on, barring the blue stingray, which, as Dave mentioned earlier on, Paul Cowley, my supervisor at the time, did his master's on, they have never been scientifically researched before. So, these species really, we just don't know anything about them. So even now at this, kind of later stage in my career, when I start a new project, it means I'm again starting from scratch and trying to understand the species. We don't know basic things like what they eat, where they live, how they move. Sometimes even taxonomy is a bit of an issue. And so, with these three new species that I did my master's and PhD on, we had assumed that one of them was a specific species. And so throughout while I'm, writing up my thesis and going through my whole beginning stages of my project, I had called it this one species. But then thankfully we had taken some genetic samples and somebody had sequenced them for us. And they were literally probably the week before I was going to hand in my PhD thesis. They were like, just by the way, that's not that species, it's a different species. So, yeah, it's always
Yeah.
working with rays is always starting from scratch, but it's exciting.
Yeah.
It opens up a world of possibilities and something I really enjoy, and why I got
I
into
was going to
studying
say,
them in the first place.
yeah, when something I've talked about, and I think you and I have talked about it in the past, like, that whole Western Indian Ocean, if you're looking for something to do as a student, just stingray taxonomy, just trying to identify what species is what, that's a couple master's theses or a PhD thesis just to figure out the
Mm-hmm.
species you have there. Because what Chantel described, I can attest to. You could be working on something, then all of a sudden you realize, like, oh, that's not the right species. It's this other species here. And that's, I kind of find it exciting in a way, but it's kind of frustrating if you're about to submit your PhD thesis or a paper and realize, like, oh, it's the wrong species. That could cause some problems, but it's really, anyway, it's pretty exciting being able to do that type of stuff. And so how many years did you in total spend going to the Seychelles for this project?
So my work ran over 5 years. So I started off with my master's, and then it sort of grew into my PhD. And so
Mhm.
I spent in total about 6 months in the Seychelles across 5 different trips. And then the rest of the time based in South Africa, sort of working up the samples and writing up.
Mhm.
Sounds horrible. 6 months in the
Terrible.
Seychelles, over
Yeah.
that time.
How was your what aspects of the thing you did some tracking studies and what other aspects of your research were involved?
Yeah, so we did acoustic telemetry for tracking, so passive acoustic telemetry. So, we stuck some acoustic tags into these. I think we had 60 in total, 20 for each species. Then we had this really nice array of receivers, both within the atoll and then further afield along the bigger bank area that we were working on. So at other different like islands and atolls, so that if these individuals did disperse from it and leave this area, that we could track them. So that was a really, really great aspect of the study. And then also looking at dietary stuff. So we did both stomach contents and stable isotopes. And stomach contents, we were really one of the sort of early people to use gastric lavage for rays. So it was kind of
Mm-hmm.
developing that technique for stingrays.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you spent all these times out there in the Seychelles and stuff, and got your thesis done. So after kind of as you got your thesis done, what was sort of your next the next move you decided to make?
So after my PhD, I affectionately refer to it as my gap year, because I had gone straight from high school through to undergrad, through to postgrad, all the way up to my PhD, to 9 years at university. Had never really
Wow.
taken a break. So after my PhD, I knew I just needed to take a step back and take a little bit of a break. But I did kind of still stay in the field, but just doing a few other things. So we have a great NGO here in Cape, or it was there in Cape Town, called the Shark Spotters. So they have these amazing people who sit on the mountainside and monitor the water for the presence of great white sharks. So it's kind of like an early warning system to get swimmers and bathers and surfers out the water if there's a great white shark around. So I spent a bit of time just helping them with some basic research and data collection. And then I spent 6 months in the Philippines, completely different, working on coral reef surveys for an NGO
Oh,
and
darn.
MPA implementation. So
Yeah. Wow. Tough. Again,
Yeah.
tough life.
So,
I say that. I'm
yeah,
sure it's tougher than we say, but we're
you're like, yeah, everybody listening at home is gonna be going like, oh god, it's like, so you got to go to the Seychelles for 5 years, got to go work on coral reefs in the Philippines. Oh, I just really hate this marine biology field. It's terrible.
Now so to do that, like what was the decision behind that, or the rationale for the decision behind that? How did you find that organization? Why Philippines? Why coral reefs when you've been focusing on elasmobranchs for the last little while?
Yeah, so as I said, I had kind of wanted to take a break from academia and just do a little bit more, I guess, work-based type stuff. And so I had belonged to this newsletter that went around where they advertised these sort of jobs in marine
Hmm.
conservation and that sort of thing. And so this position came up, and I was like, oh, 6 months in the Philippines. Okay, it's a bit of a long time away from home, but
Yeah.
and it wasn't a paid position. So this is one of the things where, especially in this field, unfortunately, if you're trying to gain work experience and you're just trying to like develop your CV, sometimes you have to take unpaid positions or do these
Right.
weird and wonderful internships. So even though the 6 month position I was working unpaid, I got to live and scuba dive for free in the Philippines, which for me was
Mm.
worth it. And, really
Yeah.
working on coral reefs and specifically the Philippines is a great example of where marine conservation happens from the bottom up. So they have these really small villages called barangays. And the fishermen there, it's their livelihoods. They know they rely on fishing as a source of protein and income, but they also understand that, they need to sustain it for future generations. And so they
Hmm.
have this huge push towards setting up these marine protected areas in the country, but there's not a lot of input from government down, and so these local villages want to put marine protected areas in, but they just don't have
Yeah.
the expertise, they don't have the skills. So we would go around and run these surveys and just say, hey, look, okay, we've surveyed here and we think this is where you should put your MPA. So it was a lot of
Okay.
community engagement and a lot of
Yeah.
involvement with local fishers and government officials. And so I really learned a lot from that project. And it was definitely a highlight in my career, even though it was completely separate from elasmobranchs and completely
Yeah.
separate from what I have gone on to do. I learned a lot of skills that then transfers, across no matter what you're doing.
For sure. Do you find your travel to the Seychelles, during your master's helped you with traveling to a place like the Philippines? Because, you mentioned earlier, it's like it's a far away of home. It's a long time away from home. I
Yeah.
don't think we, as marine biologists, acknowledge how difficult it is to work away from home. Like people get homesick and you're used to certain ways and how to do things a certain way. You're going to a completely different country, completely different culture. Here you're doing a completely different topic, but which is a benefit to you in all the ways, but it's also very like it could put yourself out of your comfort level. Do you find going to the Seychelles helped you, prepare for the Philippines?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think when you do it once, it becomes a little bit easier the next time. But as you say, it's still a completely different environment, a completely different language, a completely different culture. But that's an aspect that I love about it, and I have really enjoyed. And especially, I feel like in your 20s, that was happening all in my early and mid 20s. So you're not like fully settled yet, and you have this more spirit of adventure. Now I'm in my 30s. Would I spend another 6 months in the Philippines? I'm not too sure. But at the time, it was a perfect opportunity for me. And, it was really roughing it. I think that was the hardest part. So even within the Seychelles and then
Right.
within the Philippines, we were living in this place that didn't have running water, didn't even have sort of like glass in the windows. It was really open to the elements. You're completely out of any kind of not even luxury, but just day to day amenities that you're so used to. But I think
Yeah,
that builds character and it's part of the
for
experience. And
sure.
I wouldn't have changed anything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and even
I
from like a conservation perspective too, right? It's sorry, Dave. Even
no, go
from a
ahead.
conservation perspective, you look at how a lot of local communities have to deal with the problems that they're having, and to be able to help them, and probably helps you understand how conservation will work, sort of in like away from academia and out into local communities like the Philippines or like the Seychelles, and be like, okay, this is how a lot of people live. This kind of brings it into perspective and more of a reality of what conservation is like. Would you say that's true? Or
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's very easy to, we typically as marine biologists and conservationists, we're obviously on the side of trying to save everything and protect everything and put marine protected areas everywhere and stop the fishing and stop that. But as you say, there are these really real people and communities whose lives are so affected by these decisions that we just almost sometimes willy-nilly try and put out there. And so just having an understanding of not only the ecosystems, but the larger scale ecosystem. We're all part of the ecosystem, we as humans and the people who rely on these resources, and just understanding everything and how it works together is, really important in any conservation efforts.
Right. Yeah, we've had this discussion on some other episodes where people like yourself go to these areas and you get a really different perspective on how it is with people that they're basically their livelihoods, or if they can't catch fish or whatever, for that they don't eat. Basically, there's no going out to the store. And I think a lot of organizations that don't have people that experience that, they tend to be very think like, oh, well, we just got to stop the fishing here or stop whatever's going on. And they tend to not look at the people involved, the human element of the whole thing. And so I think you're going out and experiencing that, say, as you say, give you a more rounded experience on how people really live in a lot of the world, including, of course, a lot of Africa as well, outside, say, South Africa, where people are not fishing or catching stuff. They just don't eat. So so I think it's important. I think a lot of people, and as you said, it's good to do it when you're young, because after you experience that, after that, it's kind of like you want to stay at least like a 3-star hotel after that for your next field experience. After
Love that.
I've definitely found as I've got older, my level of discomfort, or my willingness to experience discomfort, has decreased somewhat.
Oh yeah, for sure. You want glass on your windows now, and you want the regular amenities, right?
Yeah, it's like they ask you, your friends ask you to go camping, and it's like, what hotel we staying at for the camping trip?
Just oh no, I'm always down for a camping trip. Camping and through hike backpacking, I'm down for. But short time periods, not 6 months.
Yeah, a week or two here and there.
Right. I can understand that and stuff. So as you got along, you've picked up some really good experience going, obviously, in the spending time in the Seychelles and then in the Philippines. And so when you came back from the Philippines, what was your next step? What was your next plan, or did you have a plan, or was just sort of see what comes next?
Yeah, so I was very fortunate in that, Paul Cowley, who was my supervisor for my master's and PhD, he had kind of always envisioned me coming on as a postdoc after that whole process. And so throughout, my PhD years, actually, he was just tagging a whole bunch of stingrays in South Africa. He's like, right, I'm going out, I'm fishing, I'm tagging stingrays. The data's yours when you're ready. So
nice.
Yeah.
That sounds familiar to me.
I was yeah. Well, anybody who knows Paul, that's like Paul in a nutshell.
Yeah, exactly.
But did you have did you have an idea after the Philippines, even after your PhD, did you have an idea of what you wanted to do in terms of marine biology in general? Obviously you have a lot of likes, which we haven't even gotten into in terms of science communication, but just like in general, like, going to the Philippines doing reef studies compared to going to the Seychelles doing elasmobranchs studies and ray studies, and doing more application than, compared to academia. Did you have an idea about what type of job you wanted to work at after that, or even throughout your PhD, other than like the postdoc, or like which path you want to go down?
Yeah, so I think really that year after my PhD, I kind of came to the realization that I didn't really want to go into academia. I wanted to be more on the NGO application-based side of the world. And so I finished up in the Philippines towards the end of 2019, and then I came back to South Africa, and I actually got a job where I'm based now in Plettenberg Bay, which is a small coastal town, heading up the research program of an NGO based here. But that was, I think I started February 2020, and then for everybody who knows what happened the next
little
month.
thing, little change in the world.
Just a little thing.
A little bit.
So, March 2020 rolled around and everything here in South Africa was locked down and the rest of the world. And this NGO that I had just started my job at relied on international volunteers as their main source of
Oh.
income. And so I lost my job through that. And at the time, as I said, Paul had kind of been setting up this postdoc for me. And so we had done this sort of funding application or this fellowship application, which then came through. And so then I got offered this postdoc position, even though I knew I didn't necessarily want to carry on in academia. It was a great position that came at the right, again, just came at the right time for me.
Yeah.
And Paul had been tagging these stingrays, and I knew I'd always kind of wanted to try and carry on with research in stingrays, and so it aligned with my research interests, and again, right time. And so I ended up doing my postdoc. So I started my postdoc in March 20, or no, I think it was then April 2020 when I officially started. And so for the past 4 years, it actually just finished last month, I've been doing my postdoc on rays here in South Africa, which was really a great project for me because it was the first time that I was really conducting research in South Africa, in my home country. And so it was just really special for me, and working on stingrays here, again, doing acoustic telemetry on a couple of different species, adding in these major knowledge gaps that we still have on these animals. And then through that, I also managed to set up my own little project here in Plettenberg Bay in collaboration with that NGO that I had a job very briefly with. And so I got some field work experience setting up a project here on a local estuary, where I was doing some surveys, trying to figure out what stingrays lived in the estuary. And that turned out to be a really, really successful project, and what I'm hoping to carry on with going forward. So I don't know, my whole career, I kind of feel like has been just right things at the right time. And I feel like I've just been very, very lucky. And yeah.
If I can add in, like, you're one of the few people that didn't go into the white shark route with things, and you got into an area and you literally found, I say, a niche, but the batoids are so diverse. And I always comment on the program about how you have South Africa's got one of the 5 most diverse chondrichthyan shark and ray faunas in the world, and everybody wants to do white sharks, but you were one of the few people. And I kind of followed you a little bit through your career through Paul, so I've been kind of aware what you're up to. And I always thought it was like really cool that there was somebody who actually had a passion for rays, because there's so much to do there. And you obviously got onto found that whole niche and been pursuing that. And it's just, as you've kind of talked about, it's kind of wide open what you're doing. And now you sound like you're trying to raise more awareness to the public and everything through these different NGOs. What's this one group, this Elmo Africa? What's that about? Can you talk a little about that? Is that your
Yeah,
NGO?
Elmo Africa is a little passion project of mine. It's a citizen science project here in South Africa, and it was actually started by somebody called Lisa Scruter. And so back when I was in my master's day, I kind of came across this citizen science project in South Africa, which was dedicated to sharks and rays and their conservation. And so essentially the ethos of this project is that whenever a member of the public along the South African coastline encounters a shark or a ray, either through, angling, fishing, scuba diving, boat trips, anything like that, they kind of just let us know. And then also through collecting their egg cases, which are more affectionately known as mermaid's purses. People just walking on the beach, pick up an egg case. It's kind of just like this place where people can send that information through. And so it's this repository of citizen science shark and ray sightings in South Africa. And so back in my master's, I kind of, volunteered for the project, and I ran school trips with local schools, and we went on shark egg case hunts, which was really a lot of fun. And so I'd kind of like been helping on and off with the project. And then when I started my postdoc, Lisa, who, started Elmo, she just didn't have the capacity to carry on with it anymore. And so I was like, cool, I'll take it over. So since then, I've kind of been running the project and managing the project and growing it, and working with local NGOs who also run various citizen science projects along the coastline, and just kind of collecting all of that shark and ray information into one central database that then can be used by various scientists or managers or that sort of thing.
Hmm. Cool,
That's
neat.
unreal. That's awesome.
So how did you? So your Telly's Marine Tales, which is your YouTube channel, if you everyone listening, you got to go check out this. This is an amazing YouTube channel she runs. Can you? I've got to hear the story about that. How you got that going? How you? I'm just really. I need to hear more about that.
Well, and before you do, I
Yeah.
wanted to kind of give you your flowers on this because, like, you know, when a lot of people, like, I have a YouTube channel, you know, we have a YouTube channel for Beyond Jaws, and you know, we get happy when we get a new subscriber, and we're like, okay, we're getting up there, we're almost at 500 subscribers, and we're like, oh, this is awesome, kind of thing. And I see a lot of people in marine biology or in that science communication field with the ocean. You know, you see people with, you know, 1,000 or a couple of thousand. You have 25,000 subscribers. You know, I don't know how many. I think the channel has 1.9 million views. That's incredible from someone who tries and tries to get views and all that kind of stuff. That's absolutely incredible. So I just want, before you started with that story, I wanted people to get that context before you started, because this is in my opinion, a highly successful sort of channel for marine science and marine biology. So sorry, continue on. I just wanted to let people know that before you went on.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. You know, this is something that I've been working on for a really, really long time. Again, since my master's day, which was, I don't know, even though 10 years ago now. And so I feel like, I don't know, I have this almost love-hate relationship with my channel where sometimes I'm all in and I'm go, 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 go. And then sometimes I can't even look at it for months on end. So, you know, I think the reason why it has become so successful is purely just because I've just been slowly plodding along for many, many, many years. It is by no means, you know, an overnight success or anything like
Right.
that. But yeah, I started it back in my master's day. At the time, you know, I was doing my research in the Seychelles, but I was doing the rest of my, you know, in-country work in South Africa correspondence based. So I wasn't based at my university that I was registered at. And I was kind of just looking for a bit of a marine biology community to tap into and to learn from. And at the time, you know, I was looking for other marine biologists on YouTube and I couldn't find any. So I was like, okay, well, I guess this is a gap. So I don't know, I'm going
Love
to
it.
try. So I
Mhm.
tried. And, you know, it took a really, really, really long time for any kind of subscribers count to start going up or views to start going up, a number of years. But it, you know, it's been great. It's been such a fun learning experience, learning how to just try and communicate science to a really, really broad public, how to try and, you know, it's sometimes it is a bit of a popularity, well, not a popularity contest, but you're trying to find topics or thumbnails or titles that people are going to be interested in and people are going to click on. So it's kind of a bit of a uh, trying to find the right balance between, you know, having a more scientific balanced what you want to talk about, which for me is rays, but most people don't really care about rays, versus trying to attract people to your channel and trying to get people on board so that then you can
Mm-hmm.
start talking about, you know, some of these other things that people are not familiar with. So that's kind of been, I think, the most challenging part of the channel. And really it's only been in the last couple of years that it's seen any kind of real success. And I had quite a crazy video go really viral a couple of months ago, which I still boggles my mind. But it's been fun. I haven't taken it with any kind of seriousness, or I don't have a very strict scheduling, you know, uh, thing that I stick to. Just
Right.
whenever I have some time and whenever I'm feeling into it, I post some stuff online and then whoever watches it, watches it. That's kind of the
Well,
ethos I have with my channel.
and I do like, I respect that because I know the amount of work it takes and the amount of time it takes to put you know, a YouTube channel together, you know,
Yeah.
even like consistently posting, you know, weekly and things like that. So I know how difficult that is, and even just to be able to put a video together and, you know, doing the editing and the you know, whatever's the scripting or talking or whatever you come up with, the idea all the way to the publishing takes a long time. And I do love the fact how you're just kind of like, yeah, when I have an idea, I'm gonna talk about it, and I think it's gonna be great. And every once in a while, like I'm looking at, as you were talking, I was looking at your channel and some of the views, and you're just like, it's interesting because I was like, you're right. There's not a lot of marine biologists, and probably more now than there were when you first started. But there's not a lot of marine biologists that are on, and it's interesting to see. I assume you're like your target audience is sort of like the public who wants to know more about, like, there's stingrays, there's like ocean discoveries, stuff on PhD life. Like you had one go, I don't know if it went viral that day, but you have 197,000 views on software apps I used during as a PhD student. Like, did you expect that to get that many views? I don't think anybody did, right?
No.
Like that was that right off the bat, or has that been over? Because this was 5 years ago. Was that over time that it just kind of accumulated?
Yeah, it definitely accumulated. When I first published that, it really did nothing. And I think it took about a year. And then, I don't know, for some other reason, it kicked off and then it kind of blew up a little bit, but it took a long time. And it has been this sort of gradual growth on that video.
It's just not like I love the fact that these go, because it's like that's a helpful video. I would imagine for a lot of PhD students, people starting, what software do I use? What kind of tools do I use? I think it's really helpful. You had one go, I'm not sure if this is the one you were talking about that went viral that was really interesting, but it was about 6 months ago. Why marine biologists know dolphins are scarier than sharks. And I have to admit, like the thumbnail, there was some really interesting thumbnail. You talk about thumbnails being like such a big part of it.
Yeah.
It has demon dolphins on it, and it has little horns on the dolphin. these eyes, these like devilish eyes. And normally you see a dolphin, you expect it to be smiling or something, and you got it really going. I can see why people are clicking on that.
Yeah, the whole point of that video was really, because that's the perception that people have, right? That dolphins are these friendly, smiley animals and sharks are these bad things with sharp teeth that are out to get me. But actually, the reality is oftentimes reversed, and dolphins are causing injuries and having these negative effects more so than sharks. And so it was just really just a fun play to switch up the roles a little bit in that one.
I like it. Yeah. Have you ever read there's a deepseanews.com article on dolphins, and it was like 10 reasons why dolphins are a-holes, I think is the title of the thing. And it went viral back then. That was I think like early 2010s, or maybe even earlier than that, but that went viral back then. I think a lot of people are always wondering, like, why are dolphins like so mean, and why do marine biologists not like dolphins? But that's a thing. There's a thing because of that,
Even,
so it's
in doing the research for that video, even I was shocked at some of the stories that I read. I was like, what? Dolphins did this?
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
I know if you ever talk to anybody that does, I don't know if they have any place where they maintain dolphins in captivity, because I know it's not a big thing anymore, but people that used to handle them in aquariums and stuff, when they put on the shows and stuff, they would tell you that each one has its own personality. They're literally like different people. Some are really fine, you can be okay with. Others are just really a-holes, basically. They just can be really bad. And it's almost like each one has a very distinct personality, which I thought was really interesting to deal with. So I don't know if do you ever talk, just a side note, did you ever talk with anybody that handles marine mammals when you were doing like that video, or did you just kind of do your own research and when you put it together?
No, not for that one. I just ended up doing my own research. But yeah, I think that would have been an interesting spin to put on it for sure.
For sure. Now, the other one that I wanted to talk about, and I think this was the actual one that you went viral that you weren't expecting, and I'm not surprised at this video going viral at all. Dave, I'm not sure if you had a chance to see this one. It was done 3 months ago. It was marine biologist weighs in on farm salmon versus wild salmon debate. Now, this is always a contentious issue, especially I live in Canada, BC, open salmon farms. It gets nasty when you start talking to people, depending on how you look at which side of the debate and things like that. Yeah. That had almost 1 million views, and I'm sure it's going to hit. It's at right now, Dave, it's at 922,000 views. That's huge. So what made you, talk about that subject matter? Because when you look at, you cover a wide variety of issues and subject matters. What was the reasoning behind that? And I'm sure I'm going to ask but I'm sure he didn't expect this many views. But what was the reasoning behind this?
Yeah, so I was just trying to think of a couple of topics that are more relevant to people, So obviously, we get people who are interested in science and who are interested in marine biology and conservation for what it is. But at the end of the day, if you want to try and reach a wider audience, you have to talk about things that are relevant to people. And what is more relevant to people than the fish that they eat, right? This is something that, is a part of almost, their daily lives, and it really has a huge impact. And so while I am not necessarily a fisheries expert, or definitely not a salmon expert, at the time, I also just wanted to do my own research because I didn't know much about salmon. I mean, I knew a little bit about salmon farming, and I'd watched a couple of documentaries. And so I had this very one-sided view of salmon and salmon farming. But I wanted to do a bit more of a deeper dive and do all of this research and kind of come to my own conclusion about whether I would want to be eating salmon going forward. And then sharing that message to a wider audience. And for that video in particular, because I'm not necessarily a salmon expert, I didn't want to come at it from a science says this. I wanted it to come from a more personal perspective, and my thoughts and my journey and why I came to that decision. And so, I mean, I knew that the video would do well because it would reach a wider audience, but never in a million years would I have expected it to do that well.
Yeah. I could imagine.
Yeah,
I could.
that.
Yeah, I saw that. I haven't watched it, but I did see it. But I worked for several years in aquaculture, so I've got a lot of opinions on the whole aquaculture industry, and from developed countries to developing countries, and a gamut in between, because it's sort of like going into artisanal fisheries in developing countries versus first world countries. It's a whole gamut in between, but I'll have to check it out because I saw the topic there and I thought, oh, that's going to be an interesting one to check out. So I'll definitely have to catch that one.
Obviously very controversial with lots of different opinions, but
6,014 different comments on that. And that's an interesting thing too, because, a lot of scientists, when I first started going through science communication, in the early 2010s, it still wasn't a thing where scientists would really talk publicly about their work in terms of like trying to, educate people or make people more aware of their own work or even other work. There were a few people who were doing it before, obviously, but it wasn't necessarily like, my advisor would not like advise me to say, hey, why don't you go out and talk about your things, because we'd always get comments, and especially nowadays you can get some pretty nasty comments that can cause, you see creators all the time, going through mental health issues with the comments they receive and things like that. Now with a hot topic such as this, you're going to use 6,000 comments. Not all of them are going to be, I'm looking through a few of the top ones, and they're actually pretty good. They're pretty tame. Do you ever worry when you post a video like that some of those comments are going to be, against you? Or because like I know when anytime I post anything about climate change, like on any social media site, it's like a bot comes right away, hits you with it, like, this is denial, watch this YouTube video, this tells you everything, scientists are wrong, this and that, blah blah blah. And it just kind of gets me sometimes. You're just like, man, like, I wish people would stop doing this. Do you ever worry about that when you post a video? And then when you get this amount of views, do you ever go through the comments, or do you just kind of be like, I'm just going to stay away, let people have their own sort of platform to air out their debates?
Yeah, so this again is kind of why I said I have a love-hate relationship with my YouTube channel.
Gotcha.
Because there are these really, really awful comments that come out of things. And actually the first time I had any kind of real experience with that was a couple of years when remember the documentary Seaspiracy when that came out? So I made a video just kind of, again, just airing some of my opinions about that and why I disagreed with a lot of what was said in the documentary. And that was the first time that I really experienced that, really, really mean side of YouTube, and a lot of really awful comments that came my way. And at the time, I just shut myself off from it. I was like, I'm not going to read through these comments because, as you say, it can take a big toll on your mental health. And at the end of the day, there's almost kind of no point, because those bots or those trolls or whatever you want to call them, there ain't no way you're going to change their mind or have any kind of meaningful and productive conversation in the comment section of a YouTube video. So I just completely step away from it. And I kind of did the same thing with the salmon video. So, in the beginning, I started looking at comments. And as you said, actually for that video, for the level of controversy around that topic, and different opinions and different views, and the amount of comments that I got, it was actually surprisingly positive, a lot of the comments, which I really enjoyed. But again, I kind of just got a bit scared. And so when it really started going viral, I just take a step back and I don't even read the comments. So on a video like that, I don't read the comments.
And what's interesting, I'm kind of reading through quickly as we go through. What's interesting though is a lot of people are kind of telling their own experiences. Somebody went to a restaurant, asked if it was wild or farmed, if it was fresh. Other people who grew up in the industry and sort of looking at how it's changed. It's actually, it's a very interesting context when you look at the comments here. Obviously, there's going to be some that are probably going to be horrible, but I'm surprised. It's a lot of just sort of like personal stories of their involvement or their, I guess, personal views of whether they eat salmon or not. One said they read a David Suzuki book and ever since then they haven't touched salmon, which that's their opinion, right? They've they did their research and they looked at it, but it doesn't look like there's as many nasty comments as I thought it would be, which is kind of nice to see that.
Yeah,
right? It's like,
it was nice and refreshing for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's the one thing, like with the social media, because people can literally sit in their little basements downstairs and just like go on there and just be anonymous and just put out all kinds of stuff, and you don't really know. And I think sometimes people are just like, they're just looking to cause controversy somewhere. And I know people at Andrew and I have had on the shows that, like we had Forrest Galani on there, and he obviously gets a lot of people comment on his. He just goes, he just ignores it. He goes, because he found out early on, as soon as you engage with somebody to try to give you it just goes bad. So he just stopped doing it. And other people have said the same thing. They just don't. It's hard to engage, because as soon as you engage, then you start really kind of almost stir the pot and make it a nothing into something. So yeah, it's unfortunate you can't have a respectful conversation, but I think that's just the internet and the social media realm right now. It's probably because it's also so new, people still haven't really figured it out, a lot of elements to it as well.
For sure.
But so I gotta just change it. Go ahead.
No, just one last comment on this topic. For me, I've learned how to deal with these sort of like negative comments and internet trolls and things like that. But I think oftentimes the scariest thing for me when I post a YouTube video or something like that is how my scientific peers will think of me or view me, right? Because I don't really care what some internet troll says or thinks about me, but when it comes to my scientific peers who are looking at this, and as you said, there's not very many people doing this, and so what will they think of me? Do they think I'm being silly? Do they think this is a complete waste of time? Am I no longer a real scientist because I do YouTube? And so there's a lot of those thoughts that go through my mind, and that actually is for me the scariest part of my whole science communication journey.
I completely agree on that. Sorry, Dave. I just to step in. I was the same way when I first started. I actually didn't talk a lot about my podcast, the How to Protect the Ocean podcast, when I first started, because I was worried about what my peers were going to say and what my advisor would say, and people like himself, like even like somebody like Dave, who's perfectly fine with science communication, loves. I mean, we were doing a project together. This is what we do now. But you worry about people who have been, your mentors, the people that you see as heroes, and you worry about what they'd say. And then I went to a conference and everybody was like, I really love what you're doing. And you're just like, oh, okay. Like, this is really good. And then I've changed it to, why am I actually doing it? Like, what's is it for the scientific community? No, because I'm preaching to the choir there. If I, to be honest, I look at like the people who I talk to, I'm not talking to the trolls because there's no point. I'm talking to the people who want to know more and just can't find that information on YouTube, or for me, it's podcasting, right? And I think that's the views that you're getting. You're getting people who want to know more, who want to share their story. They may not always agree with you, and that's fine, but they want to know more. And I think that's what I like. That's what I focus. That's what I learned to focus on instead of, because if not, it's scary to like talk in front of your peers and just be like, and talking at a level that you're talking at, right? And be like, is this right? Is this, are people going to agree with this? Are people going to like me after this? I get that too. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. You know, if I can jump in here, because I'm a little different generation than each of you, but you know, like when I was coming up, it was, you know, there was no internet or anything like that, but you were definitely, you were not encouraged to do like any kind of science communication. It wasn't even a thing really, but you were all, you know, go to professional conferences, but it was, if you kind of did anything, tried to sort of step out and do stuff, it wasn't really like viewed really well from my advisors, you know, whether, you know,
right.
for most of my, and what the one exception at the time, and I've mentioned him a few times, is Dr. John McCosker, who's the director at the Steinhardt Aquarium, who's from that generation. He was a mentor of mine, but he was doing, again, they didn't call it science communication, but he did that. He would go on like popular shows and communicate. And he was an excellent scientist, really top scientist, but he could break things down very simple, so the average person on the street understood it. And a lot of the people in that generation, and even in going into my generation, they would talk in too technical terms, and people wouldn't get it. And so they would, but there was a lot of discouragement. And I've told this story before, but there used to be a program on in South Africa. Maybe you might remember, Chantel, called Top Sport. This was years ago. I don't know when it was. You may not have heard. Might have been before your time, but I used to be on that quite a bit, just as a fluke, talking about doing like quote science communication. But that used to get frowned upon, and I would just, and it was literally, I would go to angling competitions and they used to cover all kinds of sporting activities in South Africa. It was like an ESPN thing, and they used to cover competitive fishing competitions. And at that time, I was sort of, this is the late 1980s. There was this American student going to competitions, and so they would start asking me just like a couple-minute interview, and it got to be a regular segment on there. But that got kind of to your point, Andrew, is that was kind of frowned upon by a lot of it, you know. And I thought it was like, well, I'm just kind of communicating to the average person out there that was interested in if they caught a stingray or a shark, just some trivial stuff about it, but people found it really interesting. But it was definitely discouraged. It was definitely like, oh, what are you doing that? Why are you selling out your science? And I'm like, telling somebody about a copper shark's not really selling out my science, you know. It's like, so
no, for sure.
But anyway, I'm sorry I did.
It's an interesting way, like it's an interesting evolution that science communication has made, especially as it evolves with the technology, and it makes it easier. Although it's still a lot of hard work, not to take away from anybody who's doing it, it's still easier to do it than it was, you know, back 30, 40 years ago, even 20 years ago. So I think that really helps, you know, in getting people to talk about it. I love it. I love seeing it. I love seeing the passion that people have doing that science communication. And I think it's great. So, you know, with that said, Chantel, as we kind of wrap up the interview here, you know, you what Dave said at the beginning, you know, as he's introducing you, it seems like you're a consultant and you work with, you know, WCS, and you work with other organizations, and, you know, working on your own research and your own nonprofit organization. So was this always the vision in terms of when you, like, as you went through marine biology, through your undergrad, through your graduate work and post-grad work, that you would be a consultant and working for different organizations? And just from a logistical standpoint, like, how do you do it? You know, like a lot of people go, okay, I'm going to get a job with one organization, work with them for a little bit. Sometimes it's contract work, sometimes it's not, you know, try and get a full-time job. But we're in a very different situation when we speak about your career. So was this always the plan? And then sort of, are you happy with this plan? And is this like, how do you manage it all?
It was definitely not the plan. So, you know, you always kind of have this idea of your typical career path from like one position to the next. But I don't know, things just always, for me, have kind of just evolved as it goes along. And so towards the end of my postdoc, you know, I talked a little bit about it early on, where I had set up this you know, my own little project here in the estuary, where we have a year-round population of stingrays, which we had no idea that they lived in the estuary here. So again, I just kind of like landed in the right place, did this project where it's the first estuary in South Africa where we've identified that we have a year-round population of stingrays. And it's a super great place to work because it's like really shallow water. It's very clear. You can hop on the boat. I hop on my sup board, my stand-up paddle board on the weekends, and I like sup around stingrays. So as a stingray ecologist landing in this place where there's just this amazing population of stingrays, again, I've just been very lucky. And so for me, I really want to carry on with my research here because I feel like I can really try and understand these species a lot more and add to this knowledge that we just don't have in our country. So I'm really passionate about carrying on with my own personal research here in Plettenberg Bay. And so I have an NGO who's kind of like supporting me and funding me, and I'm heading up their research program. But you know how it is in marine biology, there's oftentimes not enough money from that sort of side of things. And so that's kind of where the whole consultancy thing came in. And I was very lucky with my colleague, Rhett Bennett, who kind of brought me on board with WCS. And, he just said they have a whole bunch of data that they're trying to work through. And he knows I'm a strong data analyst and I love analyzing data. So I'm just analyzing a whole bunch of data for WCS as a consultant there. And so just trying to have a couple of these different things going on so I can financially support myself, but also carry on with the research that I'm passionate about. And that's kind of how I've ended up now where I am with a few different consultancies. And I'm still trying to figure out how to manage it all. I just started really this last month. And so just trying to like figure out how to manage my time in the best way possible and how to get everything done and prioritize. And so that's the challenge that I'm facing at the moment.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because a lot of people look from the outside in and are like, oh, this is really cool. Chantel's being able to do the projects that she wants, which it's amazing to be able to drive your career with the questions that you have and the questions you want to answer, and working these different consultancies. But it can be logistically challenging to be able to manage all of these projects. Consultancies, a lot of times it's like boom or bust. And so it can be challenging at that time. But would you say like the fact that you've been able to, what it sounds to be, you've been able to network and use your connections and your skill set to be like, hey, I could be advantageous, in this process, or, with analyzing data here. And then I want to do this project here. So, you must have had some sort of, relationship with that NGO that's supporting that project. So would you find that the networking is a super important part to being able to be exposed to these opportunities?
Super duper duper important. I think every opportunity that I have come across has been through networking, from just starting out my master's project where I went to every single lecture at UCT and I was like, hey, I want to do this project. Do you know of anything? To like networking at conferences and meeting people in, working in different spheres and different countries. I just had this incredible experience. I was able to go across to Florida for 6 weeks and work with scientist Kim Bassos-Hell, who does work on white-spotted eagle rays in the Gulf of Mexico. And that whole relationship came about through networking at a conference. And so it really is just about putting yourself out there and really just talking to people and saying, hey, I'm available. I have these skills. What can I do?
That's awesome. That's amazing. That's terrific. Well, I don't want to take up all your time. This has been an amazing interview, Chantel, and we'd sure like to have you back on to pick up the next part of your life's journey on this here. And can't thank you enough. This has been. I knew it'd be a good episode here, especially talking about stingrays. And so anyway, thank you so much for coming on. As I say, we're definitely going to have you back here on at some point, and definitely keep us posted as you're doing your different posts and stuff, because we're happy to repost on our fledgling channel and social media as well at the Beyond Jaws. But anyway, thank you very much.
Yeah, we appreciate you being on.
Thank you for having me. It was a fantastic conversation. I love chatting rays.
You can't go wrong, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Chantel.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chantel, for joining us on the Beyond Jaws podcast. Dave, what a fantastic interview. What just a unique individual with a unique career path, in that she just kind of lets things follow her, one after the other, and it just kind of opportunities open up. And she doesn't have necessarily a traditional path in terms of like a 9 to 5 type of conservation job. She does a lot of consulting. She's doing a postdoc. It's a very interesting way of doing things, in today's world. And I think it's, driven by what she's interested in. I thought that was really interesting. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, she's like, a lot as we know, and anyone who listens to the podcast can hear. We don't have there's not like a lot of jobs in the field, and if you're going to really pursue the field, you need to figure out a way to do it, because the chance of getting a job are really remote. And so she's just figured a way to do it, to be able to do consulting for a number of different groups. She's also gotten on with her social media or science communication. So she's kind of hitting in 2 very different areas. And as she says, she's got over 25,000 followers. So she's hopefully able to monetize some of her science communication there. But she's also been able to hook up with a number of groups to do the science and to consult on them. And I think with her, because she does raise, and not a lot of people do the raise, and she works in other species that are, let's say, not the charismatic ones, she's created a niche for herself where she can, she's in demand to do consulting there. And so I think that's really good. She's very, very entrepreneurial, which I think you have to be in this field these days to get around. In addition to doing the science, you've got to have a bit of an entrepreneurial bent. And it was a fascinating interview. I just really, I've known her for a little bit. I don't know her real well, but I've known her for a while. And it's just, yeah, I was really, really excited to have her on and to hear about her journey, which is, as we find out more and more, is like, it's never a straight line from having that passion to where you end up.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, and it's just, what I love is the fact of she, like you said, marries that science communication, follows the questions that she wants to answer, what's interested in her. She's really discovered sort of a unique research interest that people don't have and that they need. And I think that's really great. I think she's going to be in a great position for her career. And I'm looking forward to seeing how that just continues to blossom, not only from the science communication point of view, but also from the scientific point of view as well. So I think that's just a great way to do an episode, right? And tell us all about her career. So Chantel was great. So again, thank you very much, Chantel. We'll put any links that she has to her and her social media, and of course her YouTube channel, so you can check that out. You can subscribe. Speaking of subscribing, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel at Beyond Jaws Podcast on YouTube. We'll put a link in the show notes as well. And Dave, if people want to get a hold of you, how would they do so?
You can follow me on Instagram at Lost Shark Guy, Lost Sharks on Facebook, and Lost Shark Guy on X, Twitter, and also on LinkedIn. So any of those main platforms you can follow me on and see what I'm up to.
I love that. That's fantastic. And everybody else, thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of the Beyond Jaws podcast. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.